Good afternoon, everybody. It is time for our Pulp Literature Spring 2021 launch. Yay! So if you are watching us on YouTube, please feel free to put your comments in the comment stream there, or come on over to Discord. You can find the link to the Discord channel on our Eventbrite or on the Facebook event. And that's where we can have cozy backstage chats, and you can chat with the authors offline and during the launch and things like that. So we have a fabulous lineup of authors today. So we've got, just a quick rundown, we've got Weiwei Zhu, who's our cover artist. We've got Leo X. Robertson, Aaron McNair. We've got the Bumblebee winner and runner-up. And we've got Michelle F. Goddard, PG Streeter, Nancy Ludmerer, Adrian Gruber, and Mel and I will also be reading from our work in this issue. So grab yourselves a drink, a cup of tea, or a bit of bubbly. It is afternoon in most places in the world right now. So, and to my right or to my left, depending which side your screen is on, I've got Jean-Pierre, who is one of our chief editors here at Pulp Literature. Say hi, Jen.
Hi, everyone. So excited.
So first up, I want to bring onto the screen Weiwei Zhu. And I should have checked Weiwei. Is it Zhu is the pronunciation for your last name?
I accept pretty much anything that gets thrown at me. So yeah, like Shu or Zhu, okay, or like XU, or like anything, whatever people come up with. I'm like, oh, I know you're talking about me, so that's I'll take it.
Honest, that's awesome. So Weiwei is a self-taught Chinese-Canadian artist. They love to play with Chinese folklore and casual fantasy in their work. They have a science degree, which occasionally manifests in their art. And when they're not drawing, they can be found making noodles or deep diving into local forest trails and internet rabbit holes. So this cover, put that up there. Oh, there we go. Super Bloom is an ode to wanderlust in solitude and the joy of discovering new places. So welcome, Weiwei. Do you want to start off by telling us a little bit more about Super Blooms? Because that's such a neat concept.
Yeah, sure. So I don't know if you guys, or how much of your lives you spend on the internet, but it became like, I think around like early last year, there was a major super bloom in like, I think Arizona. And it got super popular online because like people post pictures, and obviously it's like an incredible like sight to behold because it's just like a huge concentration of flowers suddenly like simultaneously blooming for like a couple weeks in like the desert. So yeah, like it became super popular online, and that caused a lot of people to want to visit in person. So there was a huge influx of tourists in Arizona just to see the super bloom in person. And that kind of like, I don't want to say destroyed, because it's sort of like there's still going to be a super bloom in like the next couple years. So it's not completely destroyed, but like just having so many people stepping on the flowers and trampling them and like lying in the grass for like nice photos, sort of, definitely the ecosystem there took a hit. So I wanted to paint it, first of all, because it's like aesthetically pleasing, but also just sort of as a reminder to like appreciate the beauty of a super bloom through just looking at it without like going there and stepping on all the flowers, because that sort of, it ruins it also for other people who want to see it in person, but then by the time they get there after you, it's like just dead flowers. So yeah, like, that's sort of the inspiration for the piece.
Well, I mean, I love the picture because it's got this lonely person wandering on this. It almost looks like it could be a planet, a different planet other than Earth. It has a little sci-fi feel to it. and this lonely person in amidst all these flowers. And of course, I am always attracted to swords, so you do notice we do notice a sword on the protagonist's back there as they wander through these beautiful flowers. So
thank you. Yeah, I also love swords. It's like the one weapon that's just like, I don't know, out of the history of weapons, it's the one that's like the most attached to like legends and mythology. And like if you think about the amount of swords that have some sort of story attached to it versus like axes.
There are very
like
few magical axes, really.
Yeah. So definitely swords have like a special mystical niche in the world of stories for sure. So
yeah, and Rodolfo Caprofero calls the sword the queen of weapons, so I agree with that.
Very apt. Yeah.
And I also wanted to mention that Weiwei has also done a comic in previous issues, and that was in issue 28. There we go. And it was a lovely little short 3-page comic, Chimera. And do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So the idea behind Chimera is, sorry, I have my tablet on like the side, so that's where I'm looking. But yeah, so the idea behind Chimera is sort of, I wanted to write or do a comic at least about my experience as a Chinese Canadian. So basically, I was born in Canada and grew up in like a suburban area of Ontario where my family was like one of the only Chinese or let alone Asian families around. So as a kid, I sort of became like that token Asian girl in class. And I actually really enjoyed it. Like I loved playing like the tourist guide role where I would be like, oh, check out this cool thing that I bet you've never heard about because it's Chinese. And like I loved sort of being like the in-class expert on anything Chinese. But then once I got to high school, I went to a high school that had more diverse people. Like it wasn't just white people and me, the one Asian. And that's when I started to realize like, oh, I really don't know anything about Chinese culture or Asian culture or any other culture at all. And then finally it culminates to me going to China on a trip with my family. And that's when it really hits me like, wow, like how could I have been any sort of expert in Chinese culture? I don't know like the first thing about it. So I felt like, wow, instead of a tour guide in China, I'm like the most ignorant tourist ever. I just happen to look Chinese. And that's it. But like the second I open my mouth, everyone there is like, you're not from China.
Oh, dude.
So yeah, I kind of wanted to share that experience in my comic. And then yeah, the other like I guess main message I wanted to say in my comic is also just like the idea that China is like it barely qualifies as a country. It to me now it feels more like maybe like 60 or 70 countries stuck together in one giant label. Because like if I think about it, the town I'm from or the town my parents are from in China, it's like a 2-hour drive from Shanghai. But the dialect from my town is so different from the dialect of Shanghainese that I can't understand people talking in Shanghai. And I can also just barely understand my grandmother too, because she only speaks the dialect of my town, and not Mandarin, which is the Chinese that I learned growing up here. So like I can really only communicate with my grandma through like pointing at stuff and being like, me hungry, cook food. um, so yeah, it's just like wow, I can't like like the idea of China, just like I like can't really be defined as a country because you can't just like go to a random part in China, even if you are Chinese, and expect to understand everyone there. Anyway, yeah,
Well,
that's like the
it's a huge country with a huge landmass and a huge population and a huge long history of very different provinces and cantons and things like that. So it's like
Mhm.
you're right. It is an entire world, not just a country, almost.
yeah, yeah. And so like I say like I like using Chinese elements or like Chinese symbols and like motifs in my work, and I do, but um it's also sort of like motivated by me wanting to learn more about it. Um because I grew up with the symbols, like seeing the symbols like red lanterns and like food tiger stone tiger
Oh,
sculptures and stuff. But I never like fully understood like the origins of those until like I actually took like the time to research and like figure out like why are those like everywhere in China and like stuff like that. So
well,
there's just so much so much lore to go into.
it is, and I encourage everybody to to pick up issue 28 and read that really short comic because it's a short comic that packs a lot into it. We just have some comments coming in over YouTube. Claire Lawrence said, "Love the cover."
Thank
And,
you.
And yeah, everybody's agreeing that it's stunning. So,
The compliments.
well, it is beautiful work, and I do hope we have more of your covers in the future because
yeah, I'd love to do more.
Yeah. So
if there's anything fitting.
Everybody keep your eyes out for this up and coming star. Thanks so much, Wei Wei. I'm going to bring Leo Robertson on now, coming to us all the way from Stavanger, Norway. Hi, Leo.
How's it going?
So Leo Robertson is a Scottish process engineer, writer, and filmmaker, currently living in Norway. And his first story was, we published it a year ago, actually. It was Snapshots, and it was in issue 22. Coincidentally, or not, maybe by fate, also in the same issue that we had Robert Silverberg as well. So Leo and Robert have become a pair. We're now going to only publish them in the same issue forever on. And he's got two novellas out this year: The Grimhaven Disaster and The Glow with Aurelia Leo. And he's currently working on, or has just released, I believe, the horror feature film, or you just released the trailer for the horror feature film in the creepy basement of a local art studio.
Yeah, all true.
So welcome, Leo.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your story in this issue and give us a little taste of it.
Oh, sure. So start my reading and everything? Yeah. So my story is called Bar Hopping for Astronauts. It took me forever to do. It's like a rewrite of a story I finished in 2014. And in January of each year, typically I like to go back and like rewrite stuff that I had attempted before to prove to myself that I'm much better than I used to be. And it seems like pop literature agrees, for which I'm very thankful. So I'll go ahead and read a little extract of it. This is Bar Hopping for Astronauts. Dodgy bars like this one sport fake women and real bartenders, the opposite of what mostly male clientele wants. But the astronaut isn't picky anymore. Besides, he doesn't much mind the prospect of spending an evening in the company of robo-strippers, their skins torn and peeling, the ragged mechanics of their limbs peering through. Decay into obsolescence merely adds to their humanity. He finds a stool at the bar's far end and sits, leaning his rubber-sheathed elbows on the counter's stinking wood. Gov cams on the walls turn to him, the amber rings of light around their lenses signify inactivity. Manually disabled, no doubt, by local glow-life gangs. Flies buzz lazily between beer puddles. A blonde woman shoots him a sneering glance as she walks back to her posse of friends, all of them with glossy hair and clear heels. They gossip in tight circles, their thin voices needling in his ears. Through the chip in his head, he mentally pings a noise reduction to his helmet, reducing their sound by 50%. The middle-aged bartender approaches, his metallic pupils glowing, bloodshot streaks firing out across his corneas. Black market implants, for what purpose the astronaut doesn't know. The bartender doesn't react to the astronaut's suit or to the darkened smart glass visor covering his face. People asked about that stuff here, the clientele would vanish. He says something, muffled words with a rising inflection. The astronaut demutes. Drink, the bartender says, miming a glass. Do you do lunar juleps? He asks. We might have lost it a few barware updates ago, but I'll check. He eventually returns with a dirty highball of slime green fluid. The astronaut dips his finger into the glass and his glove sucks it all up. Nanites metabolize alcohol for him before the drink even reaches his bloodstream. Nanites are many things, but fun isn't one of them. As the astronaut tries to place the highball back in the bar without causing a fuss, he feels people looking at him funny. The gecko pad of his palm sticks to the glass like Velcro. He carefully unpeels it. The bartender sighs. What the hell are you doing here? Huh? By the looks of your suit, you must be what, late 60s? Try the Coloris district. You know Tycho singles, that's more your speed. The astronaut shakes his head. They don't let me in with the helmet on. Then take it off. I can't. I'm not babysitting some dementia-ridden old coot, okay? I'll do you this one last courtesy, then be on your way. The bartender eyes up the suit. I can see the flap for the emergency cord from here. The red one, right here, I'll get it. The astronaut bats the hand away. He turns and pushes through the throng, heading back outside. There you go. You're muted.
Sorry, I had my phone rang in the middle of your reading. So I mean, thank you. I love that story so much. It's wonderful. It's got so much to it. Like it's about aging and it's about, you know, feeling relevant and things like that. And yet it's also, you know, beautiful, futuristic, sort of steampunkish in a way. Like not steampunk, but it's got that sort of I don't know, neopunk feel to it. So.
Yeah, there's like a kind of ostentatious use of technology or something. It's flamboyantly introduced. I don't know. I wouldn't even know what to say. Yeah.
But it's just got a lovely feel to it. And it was one that I felt I would love to see that one illustrated as a comic.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, it was or as a short film. Or maybe a film, you know, I mean, you're a filmmaker, make it into a film.
Sure.
It takes a lot of special effects and things to do the suit, but...
Yeah, sure, there'd be a lot of green screen and cardboard if I was to do it in my little low-budget group.
So what inspired that?
So I wrote it around the time that I'd learned that I was getting the first story accepted with Pulp Literature, I think. So it was like a cold winter. Like I say, I was rewriting an old story, and like commuting to this island where I lived alone, and just feeling very lost in the new year and a bit low energy, and wondering what was going to happen next in my own life. And I think that came out in the story, which was like very gentle, I feel, and about someone much older than me who still has no excuse for not just trying something new because he's still here and he's still got a life and there's still opportunities for him. And so I think living vicariously through that character and seeing that happen, I was like, I didn't know how it was going to end or that it was going to end positively. I just kind of figured that out as I was going. And then I realized once I was done, yeah, this is how I feel. If you're still here, you've still got opportunities, you've still got chances, and you've got to keep taking them and adapting yourself to the world, as scary as that is.
Yeah, that's that's a wise message.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for coming and reading. it's the sad thing about the pandemic is that we can't have our launches in person, but the wonderful thing is that we can have you here all the way from Norway. So that's it's opened a new realm for us, and I'm really delighted to have you here. So head on over to the Discord chat with your fans in the audience there, and I just want to say to everybody listening, please make sure you go to the Discord, put your name down in the door prize, because we will be drawing throughout the show, and there are lots of things to be won. The other thing I wanted to add is that if anybody pre-orders the print copy, where'd it go? There it is. The print copy, which is coming out very soon. But if you order it today, for today only, you will get the ebook version as well. So it's a 2-for-1, and that will immediately let you read along with our authors. So you can go and read these stories right away, or read them along while they read out, which sometimes I like to do. So please do that. So thanks again, Leo. I'm going to bring Erin McNair on to the screen. Hi, Erin.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. That's great.
So Erin was the runner-up in the Raven contest. Was it the Raven contest? It was the Raven. Okay.
Yep.
Dropping my contests. And she's from North Vancouver here in BC. She's been published in the Walrus Room Feathertail Review event, and you have a story coming up in Prairie Fire as well, I believe.
Yep.
And you're working on a book of short stories and a novel, and you have a blog.
I do. Very sporadic blog, though.
So tell us a little bit about the story that we've got in this issue.
Well, it's a bit of a weird story. It's I think it was inspired by the fact that sometimes as writers you'll feel a moment of inspiration and you don't really know where it comes from. And in this story, a writer feels this inspiration, and it's actually his readers from the future. So the future readers are speaking to him and trying to get the message to him to keep going and keep doing what he's doing, because he's having a hard time of it. And I think any writer can probably relate.
Yes. So why don't you give us a little taste of that?
Okay, yeah, I'll read a little excerpt of it. It's called "We Can Be Done with Words." It can be done with words. Sorry. We know you have it in you, Thomas, even though you don't know it yet. Listen to your future readers. We know what we are talking about. You'll know it in about 2 years and 4 months when your agent calls and says something like, "We've done it," but you can't quite hear her words over the static inside your brain. You dared to imagine that this book, The Last Map, would feed your family. It was all you were hoping to achieve. We got this bit of information from the videos and interviews many years later in your career, where we are now, whereas you are still huffing the fumes of writerly dream ether. You have no thoughts of transcending culture, no ideas about binding humanity together in one 84,900 word paper-bound package. You knew your prose was powerful, but every writer thinks that, from what we've heard. We know that right now, writing feels like extracting the marrow of your incisor tooth with a hollow needle, made worse by a sunny morning in front of an incessant blinking cursor, waiting. Later, you will tell us about the anguish, pain manifesting itself in physical symptoms like neck aches, Crohn's, gout. It's almost like he was giving birth, your wife chimed in one rare interview where you told her to come up and join you on stage, flashing that toothy grin, your sharp-angled jaw handsome in that forgotten cowboy sort of way. You told us halfway through the book divorce was imminent, but she hung on. She concurred. Living with a writer is awkward. All those silent spaces in their minds, filled with combustible gas, she will say. I am a great writer because she was a great wife, you said, and we cringed a little because that's a given, until we realized you actually meant it. We watched as you took a sip of tea and then described the origin of Janus, our heroine, our goddess of knowledge, your hands moving through the air as if sculpting. How Janus means two-faced. We gasped at the revelation, of course, her dual nature of light and dark, of loving experimental jazz, but also eating dirt when no one was looking. Then the story goes on, and the future readers discuss his despair at this point in his life when he's trying to write. And they go back to talking about his book. The part in chapter 8, when the octopus gives Janus mouth-to-mouth resuscitation after she's given up and thrown her body overboard into the Pacific, where its cephalopod consciousness imparts, along with all of its knowledge of the sea. We especially love the paragraph where the octopus wraps Janus in a cloud of inky darkness, taking her briefly to the stars and the center of everything. We were relieved to see it was a circle. And what about the next chapter? Janus coalesces, where she can't stop rearranging her apartment, moving the shiniest of her objects closest to the door in case she has to pack up quickly. A lesson from the octopus she wholeheartedly embraces. We do that too. We can't help ourselves knowing what we know now, about being ready for any adventure that comes our way, and how often things with shininess have weight and can be used as a weapon, but only as a last resort. Another section. You taught us how to change everything on page 89, right after the sex scene when you knew that we'd be paying attention. You laid out what others thought defunct, theories about superstrings and bending of time, things we never entirely understood but had read about in Scientific American. Critics thought you were reaching, especially with all that breathing life into your previous self stuff. How could we go back and change who we had been? But we found we could. So many of us had read the book, we realized that we were all sharing a similar thought process. We were applying the same notions to our everyday lives. The critics backed off and became converts. You had tapped into something beyond the science, the missing piece, part love, part mathematical explanation of the path a butterfly takes. There's a little chunk of it.
Thanks so much, Erin. I love that line about the shiny things that have weight and can be used as weapons.
Yeah, thanks. It's funny, after I wrote this, I saw that the Netflix movie, the one about the octopus, My Teacher. I can't remember the name of it, but they're just so smart. So they're amazing creatures.
Definitely. And there's a comment from Jessica Fabricius who said, "Yeah, I can relate to that. Great read."
Thanks.
And Clara Lawrence says, "These are terrific stories. Hearing them breathes life to the words," which is so true.
That's
and
excellent.
it makes it's very meta. Not only is your story meta, but then when the author reads it out loud, it adds another level of meta-ness to it. So it's quite nice. And then seeing you read it in your beautiful sunny garden with all this sort of darkness and authorly angst going on, coming off the page, it's quite the contrast.
Yeah, well, I think that I like the idea of people in the future having read your words and telling you to just keep going. So
it's a nice conversation to have, and it's a nice thing to imagine to keep you going.
Definitely, yeah.
So I am going to bring Geneviève onto the screen right now, and we are going to do a prize draw. So Jen, do you have the list of prizes in front of you, or shall
I can jump to that. I just had to say, I don't know what it says about us as individual writers, the phrases that stick out, but for me, it was huffing the fumes.
Yeah.
That's what I wrote down. That's where I'm at.
Totally.
So Jen, I do have the door prize list here. Do you want me to just start with the one at the beginning?
Yes.
Okay, the first one up is the digital subscription.
Okay, so I am using my colorful polyhedral dice here. Purple is the 10s, blue is the 1s. And It is number 11. Do we have an 11 in the door prize?
I think right now we're just going up to 10. I don't
Okay.
know if somebody wants to hustle over. They have.
Well, you know what?
11.
We'll just use the one die, and that is a 1. So that is Graham J. Darling. You have won a digital subscription. And let's do the second one as well.
That is the Leo and Bob collection.
The Leo and Bob collection. Okay. So what you get with that, let me just change the screen to a widescreen here. You get both of these. So we get issue 22 and issue 30. Stories from Robert Silverberg and Leo Robertson. And that is number 7. Who is number 7?
Wei Wei.
Wei Wei.
Yes.
Yay.
All right. So thank you so much for your reading, Erin.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And that was, again, as I mentioned, that was a Raven winner. And we're also bringing on today some of our Bumblebee winners. So right now we have Melissa Nelson, whose story was a runner-up in the Bumblebee contest and will be published in our summer issue. Let me just grab your bio here. So Melissa grew up in the Lower Mainland with a horror movie buff for a mother. Her formative years were shaped by monsters, ghosts, and the likes of Jason Voorhees. And she now aspires to write something that will keep her mother up at night. So with that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story that was runner-up?
Sure. So this was the first piece that I wrote this year and the first piece that I actually finished in a very long time, and was definitely inspired by the isolation and the loneliness of the past year. And reading the description for the Bumblebee contest and that idea of something warm and welcoming, but that packs a little bit of a sting, really resonated with me. And this is the story that came out of that.
All right. Well, why don't you take it away? And you can read the whole thing because the Bumblebees are very short.
Sure, thank you. So the story is called Solstice, and it goes like this. Every winter, some star-crossed vagrant finds themselves at our stoop. Sometimes snowblind, usually numb with hypothermia, they cry when we open the door. Mother peels away their icy clothes, I fetch the warmest quilts, and little brother puts bricks on the fire. Mother calls them our winter guests. Sometimes they find their way alone, others, father stumbles upon them when he is hunting the barren wood. Nestled in, mother serves them cups of hot broth, and I wait for their voice to return to whisper, "What is it like out there?" Most come from far away, places with department stores and paved roads. This year, our winter guest is from another continent altogether, trying to escape the ghost of his young bride. She was your age, he says, or maybe a bit older. Consumption, the wicked thing, took her from the world before she got to see it. On nights when the wind screams, I sneak to the corner of the room to pry up the board behind the basin, where I've hidden the book and pencil, a gift he left at the darkest part of winter. Something to trap dreams with, he said, when I caught him writing in it. When I stared back, he continued, dreams like to leave you. If you write them down, they are yours forever. Behind the pages he filled, I write down every detail I can remember of our winter guest stories. General stores they bought supplies in, or rivers they followed into the Rockies. Our guests are never ours for long. As the new year looms and snow piles high, they start to worry about moving on. But mother is persistent. She was a nurse once before little brother and me. That is one of the 2 stories we exchange with our winter guests. The first is fraught with forbidden desire, a young couple driven to the wilderness to escape expectation. The second, the hardship that followed. It isn't easy, they say, but we find ways to make do with what little we have. Our winter guests like this. It is an answer to a question they had not thought to ask. But he did. He thought that isolation was akin to starvation. There comes a time each year when we wake up to find ourselves trapped with our winter guest. They gaze at the white walls and then our empty shelves with saucer eyes, but father is an anchor. He was a captain once before little brother and me. Father's heavy hand on their shoulder, we huddle around our winter guest to give thanks that they found our stoop. When the thaw comes, Father ventures to the wood to send the winter guest on. Plumes of smoke wave as Mother scrubs the basin and little brother lies in the grass, a stretch of pale winter belly reaching out to greet the sun. When this thaw comes, I will take the book and see the world they spoke of. I will scream at the first stoop I find.
Oh, that is wonderful.
Thank you.
It's so chilling and beautifully written.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm so grateful to have the opportunity and very excited. This is the first time I'll be published, so I'm very grateful.
I'm worried for your mother.
She loved it, thankfully. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And have you been writing any more? What else has come out this year?
I have been writing more, nothing else that's been submitted yet. But the story that I'm working on right now is, again, dealing kind of with isolation, but about somebody who's trapped in a world where corrosive haze has taken over and prohibits her from leaving the house, and what sort of happens then.
Well, that's kind of allegorical at the moment. I'll look forward to seeing more from you, and we're looking forward to publishing this piece. So again, for those of you buying the current issue, you won't find that in this issue, but it will be coming out in the summer issue. Leo said, "Congrats, Melissa, great reading," and Jessica Fabricia said, "Written like a true bumblebee." So.
Thank you.
Well, we've actually got some notes here too, streaming from Alan. What a wonderful beginning to a long career, and Nancy agrees it's a lovely story. So,
thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to bring on our bumblebee winner. So please welcome Alan Sinchik, and I should have checked with the pronunciation of your name. Is that correct? Oh, you're muted.
All right. Yes, I can speak. Sinsick.
Sinsick. Okay.
Yeah, like the Sinsick soul.
So Alan is a teacher at Valencia College, and he's published in countless journals. Short stories have won a number of contests, and you said you've got a MFA from Western New England University and Columbia back in the day. He's also published a children's chapter book, Edward is Only a Fish, that was reviewed in the New York Times, translated into German, and recently issued as a Kindle edition. So you are prolific and varied in your writing.
Well, if you look at the background, I don't have a penthouse apartment in New York City. I'm in a garage in Florida, but I have a picture in the back with New York in it. So, I used to live there for a while, so yeah, I can pretend.
So tell us a little bit more about this story that you submitted to the Bumblebee and won.
Well, this is, if you've ever been to a Brazilian restaurant and they come up with this big cone of beef, you carve off a chunk of it. I've been working for like 2-3 years now on a set of novels. I've got 2 novel manuscripts that I've been immersed in. And I'm still shopping, trying to find an agent who's interested. You know, I say it's kind of like ice fishing in the wilderness, where you bore a hole in the ice and you drop a line, bait the hook, and then you wait in the cold for an answer from somebody. So that's been the process. And in the process, this character of Maggie has emerged. And the section that I looked at and crafted as flash fiction, she is old now, remembering back to her younger days. She's sitting in the sun at the end of her driveway and remembering back, and she's got a little tray of biscottis there, and you know, there's more involved, of course, because there's all these adventures that she had been through when she was younger. But she's a very feisty character, doesn't give up no matter what obstacles are thrown in her way. I call her a bitter beauty, because She's won the hearts of many men, but she has a limp from polio that struck her when she was a child. So there's an interesting sort of twist in her personality that emerges. And if you're curious, if you go onto alansinsick.com, there other portions of the novel have made it into print in contests and various scenarios. So if you want to dabble into the, I guess, little islands of publication that I hope someday will become like an entire novel manuscript, you can go browse through the website. So.
Well, that's a one way to approach, getting that novel out there, is doing it piece by piece. So
sure. Yeah.
So let's hear from Maggie. Maggie, right? Maggie, yes.
Maggie, okay. The other hand, hammer hand, she folded into a fist, held it, trembled it there. There, she said, take that. She made as if to thump the graven surface of the tray. The biscotti cowered. The fly buzzed, landed, buzzed again. She closed her eyes, tipped into the wind, listened for the fly to land. You don't mess, no, you don't mess with Maggie. Blind Maggie's what they called her behind her back. She'd hidden it as long as she could. Inside the slapjack, a cosmos she breathed into being every day at dawn. It was easy. Every implement belonged to her. Every maneuver she mastered. Even the regulars in the silent morning when they'd weary in to break the fast, smoke up the counter, rustle the newsprint into wobbly tablets that crackle in the hand. She knew who they were by the gait and the rhythm of the breath and the scent of the aftershave, the tick of the watch, the creak of the stool, the dust of the trade and the thread of the clothing, the rust of the gunite, the soot or the grain. So long as she presided over the diner in the yard, the hen house and the woodshed and the garden, they were none the wiser. Only when she ventured out did they notice the difference. At the feed and seed, how she pinched at the packet to suss out the name. And at the grocer with the spices, how she'd sniff the lid, shake the jar as if to weigh the price. Maggie, who'd always been so fierce, who'd always dare the trucks to hit her when she speared off into the midday rush. They watched as she nudged up into the crowd at the crosswalk, felt her way up the shelf of sundries at 5 and dime, fingered the tin dome of the talc and the bulb of the eau de cologne and the tube of lipstick, ruby red, flame glow, cylindrical as the shell of a shotgun. Maggie fought the sun to stay awake, straightened herself, parried the sound of the birds and the wind in the pine, set herself to the task at hand, battled her way back to the time, to the place, to the day they found her in the rain, in a stand of oaks a mile off the trail. She'd followed the stream till the water rose, and then, as the slurry ripped at her ankles and her knees, climbed up onto higher ground. Where? To hell with where. She was where she was. It was the world was in a tangle. Then, by and by, Cochrane come along, out gigging bullfrogs and around about dawn, and that dog of his. Yip, yip, she hears it. Dog got a possum, maybe. Got a squirrel. No, on the scent he is what he is. Got himself a Maggie. Yap, yap. Yap, yap, yap. Up out the cane he comes, Cochrane, sluicing up a swamp in the wake of them waders, dragging a sack of hoppers, high-stepping up the muddy bank. Up the trunk he runs a torch, and bingo, there she is, pressed up into the hollow of the oak, stick in hand, the mushrooms at her feet, the basket broken. Yo, Maggie, been out shopping, I see. Digging you a grave, Cochrane, you and that dog of yours. You want I should fetch you an umbrella? If I was made of marzipan, look like I made a marzipan to you? Now, Cochrane, he got the wit to run a dog, maybe, navigate a hand of poker, but a woman, you got me. You got me there. And that was that. And off he went. Waiting for the clatter of the rain to cease, that's what she was about. Waiting to where she could hear the road again and the whistle at the depot and the distant whine of the drudge at the base of the phosphate embankment to sound her back through the woods and over the fields and under the shade of the oak in the yard home. So be it, right? You make do. You live the life you got. Stands to reason, really, when you think about it. Never would she admit, even to herself, the need for another set of eyes. No, any more than she would think to order up a son to compensate for the one she lost. Shh, listen. There it is now. You hear the buzz?
Thank you. That's such a wonderful story. And we loved reading it when it came in, and we're so glad that that our judge Bob Thurber loved it as much as we did.
Yeah.
I
Fantastic
really
story.
appreciate that you're going to print it, and I look forward to seeing it. It's kind of fun in the writing to not know what the character is going to do next, and then you put them in a situation and you find out, oh, this is what they would do. You kind of discover the character as you write it.
Alan, your reading was so wonderful, and I wondered while you were reading, as you write, do you write by ear? Do you read out the melody and the sounds? And is that...
Absolutely, I just obsess about the word music, and
Yeah.
I'm the guy in the coffee shop mumbling to himself, and people think that I'm saying the same line over and over again and changing the wording and saying out again. I mean, I don't say it loud, but you can see me mumbling.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, there's so much going on with your words and your phrasing. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, it is lovely, and you can tell that all the lines are so crafted in there. So I thought having my fellow editors on, and we lost Melissa, but just talking about what makes a winning story in some of these contests. So, we have 3 fiction contests and 1 poetry contest, and our fiction contests are all for different lengths or different word lengths, but the Bumblebee is the shortest. So, I would say that's the hardest one to write for. Would you guys agree with that? It's harder to write 750 words than it is to write 2,000.
And you're a novelist as well as a short fiction writer, I feel. Did you say?
I hope if an agent's listening, yes, they will say, you're a novelist. I tell you, it's very interesting, the situation you're in when you write short stories and you write flash. You can be in a workshop, you can share with friends. You can't, it's like going up to somebody's house and dropping off a horse and watching them to watch it for the weekend, to hand somebody a novel manuscript and ask you for feedback. You just don't do that. And so it's hard to get anybody that would read the whole thing and give you some response. So you're kind of working on your own, but we'll see.
Well, personally, it's far easier for me to look after someone's horse for the weekend than to read an entire novel for a weekend.
Well, yeah, someone once said, I don't remember what the writer was, that writing a novel is like sitting down to knit a sweater that's going to be 100 yards long. But the point about flash is that it's not merely a snippet. It needs to have a sense of completion, that it's inherent, that it's a thing in and of itself, maybe not necessarily beginning, middle, end, but you feel like it's a complete experience, and that's tricky.
Alan, that's so true.
Yeah.
And not just having the convenient ending or the tidy ending, but to have just this really beautiful something, and Blind Maggie definitely has that. It's lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah, complete it. Well, thank you so much for coming on and reading that, and we look forward to publishing that in the summer. Now it's time to hear a little bit more from Mel, who's going to be reading from The Extra. So for those of you who have been following along, Frankie Ray, The Extra, a girl from Vancouver who went to Hollywood with her best friend and somehow ended up as a detective and dressed in men's clothing. And Mel, why don't you tell us a little bit more?
Frankie Ray and Connie Mooney. How can 2 young people get into so much trouble in 1934 Hollywood? They land up, and true, they do get to jobs as extras and actually get on screen, and their first step. But the next thing that happens is that a movie star, one of the greatest of the world, turns up dead on their sofa, and Frankie's accused of the murder. So they're all telling her to go home, go back to teaching. But instead she dresses as a man, dyes her hair platinum as she's always wished to do, and turns out to be a very handsome young man, a handsome young detective heading out to interview this drunken starlet, Billy Starr, who says she knows who killed him, who killed Gilbert Howard, the great movie star. She's trying to interview Billy Starr, but and Marietta Valdez, the great movie actress, bursts in along with King Sampson, the producer. Sampson says, Marietta, I'll be damned if I screen test your every relative and acquaintance, no matter what you say. I'll get Billy cleaned up, Sammy. You talk out of the other side of your face, Marietta said. Until this moment, Frankie might not have been in the room. Now, with a jerk of her head, the actress says to Sampson, meanwhile, you just work things out with Frank Achilles here, the way we discussed. Marietta shot the studio head a warning look and led her sister out of the room. The door slammed behind her, setting the kite tail spinning. Sampson batted at a dragon kite tail. He pulled it down and tore it across the wings. All I want is control over my own goddamn film in my own bloody studio, he said. Is that too much to ask? Frankie raised her eyebrows. What a heel King Sampson was. But he did have a right to run his own movie business. Worse, I gotta manage this rotten cast. Sampson moved about Billy's room, yanking more kites down from the ceiling by their strings and tossing them on the floor. I hired two of the biggest stars in the world to head up the Emperor of New York. One of them, Gilbert Howard, a manipulative bastard, completely uninsurable, who now gets himself murdered. And as co-star, I signed Marietta Valdez, who always has to know best about my movie and won't even take an engagement ring from me. Frankie said, well, life's a bed of rocks, I guess. You got that right. Now Marietta says Frank Achilles has got something, and he's a new face. And with his coloring, he'll look wonderful up close next to me. Hell, she's right, though. Frankie started. Right about what? Frank Achilles? The producer was interested in her as a leading man. Ye gods and little fishes, her dream of being discovered was coming true right here and now. She'd always daydreamed about being discovered by a producer or a director, and she was riding a bicycle or perching on a stool at a drugstore counter, sipping a milkshake. Never once had she imagined being offered a screen test while wearing a man's disguise in a brothel. She sighed and then vowed that since she had to turn him down, at least she would do her utmost to enjoy every minute. Sampson said, you got something new about you, I guess. Frankie replied breezily, well, then I'm like 100,000 other faces. I'm nothing special. Well, you're right about that, Sampson said, but no actor is anything special until somebody like me gets his hands on him. Is that so? If Frankie had been wearing her true identity and not a gentleman's gray suit and brogue, she'd never lie like she was lying now. Well, I have no great desire to be a movie star anyway. All that glamour could get on a fella's nerves. Sampson glared. Can you act? Frankie proved that she could act by drawling, are you really going to let me decide how to answer that question? Sorry, page is stuck. Well, you got that right as well. Sampson shot Frankie a nasty look. I got more important question. Can you handle Marietta Valdez for me? Manlike, Frankie shrugged. Sampson nodded. Then I'll test you since you seem to be a fellow who can take no for an answer if you're lousy on film. I can give no for an answer too. Frankie wished for a hat so she could tilt it over one eye. So here goes. Nope, don't want a screen test. Thanks, though. Don't argue with me. King Sampson shook his head. I hate men who argue all the time. Look at that damn Gilbert Howard. God rest his soul. Well, I like a good argument myself. It occurred to her that her current plight, being sought for murder, was a sort of a life and death argument as well, some of it with the newspapers and some of it with the police. She added, I lived with an arguer all my life, my dad. Anyway, isn't everything you see on the silver screen an argument? All those actors and actresses suffering and kissing and battling and rescuing, with the hero carrying the day during the 90-minute black and white debate. A smart guy, King Samson snorted. Like I need one when I've got Marietta Valdez. You'll test. Come on. Samson opened the door. And less of the back chat while I'm trying to do you a favor.
That's great. And for anybody who who has got the ebook and was trying to read along, you may have been a little bit lost because Mel was reading from the previous issue. Issue
Sorry about that.
29.
I was focusing on that scene today. Yeah.
It's all wonderful. They're all wonderful scenes.
Thank you.
It's got such a fabulous flavor of the 1930s. Not that I was there, but it makes me feel like I was. Not that you were there either, but
I would go there like a shot.
I think it is time to do another prize draw. So everybody, last chance, get your name in the door prize. And we're still under 20, so I will use one die. And it is number 5. Who is number 5? Is that Melissa? So congratulations. What has Melissa won?
A 1,000-word critique.
Okay. So Melissa, if you have a 1,000-word piece that you want critiqued, we will send you out an email and let you know how to send that in. And you'll get an editor's critique on that. And then the next prize is a Stella ebook bundle. So this one will give you Stella Ryman and the Fairmount Manor Mysteries by Mel Anastasia, and The Labors of Mrs. Stella Ryman, the sequel to that fabulous book. And this one is number 2. Who is number 2?
Is that Brighton Hug?
Brighton Hug. So Brighton, just give Brooklyn your email address. Brooklyn will chase you down in Discord there, and we will send you those 2 ebooks. And we hope you enjoy them. So now I am going to bring on Michelle F. Goddard. So, hi, Michelle.
Hey there. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you perfectly.
Awesome.
So Michelle is a vocalist and musician who's performed around the world, and a composer with credits for work in musicals and films. Her short fiction has been published in B-Cube Press's Alternative Apocalypse anthology, Ultar Press's Machinations and Mesmerism anthology, and Hybrid Fiction magazine, among others. She's currently working on several short stories and a science fiction novel. Her story in issue 30, let me see here, right at the top of our master there on the cover. So her story is about peppers, and it's called Boot or Butt. However you like to pronounce that.
Boot.
Boot.
I suppose.
So, Michelle, tell us a little bit about this story and what inspired it.
Well, it's funny. I sort of forgot until I heard everyone talking about their inspirations, and I was like, I think as writers, sometimes you're looking for inspiration wherever you can get it, and I think perhaps I can speak on behalf of a lot of short story writers that, you start looking around the internet for places to submit story contests or story magazines or anthologies, and you can get a lot of inspiration for that. You can either write for the anthology itself or just use it as a form of a source of inspiration. And this is where this story came from. the inspiration, or the prompt, as magazines will often do, was ghost. And the initial thought was, to write a ghost story or something like that. But then you start to think, well, how many other people are going to be submitting a ghost story? So you're trying to, differentiate yourself from the other writers in some way. So you start thinking about ghost, and, what does that mean? And, what are you trying to say? And what are the themes you're exploring? And yada, 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 yada. And I ended up with ghost peppers. And hence where I landed. Obviously, my story did not get accepted, but I'm super, super happy that it found a home with you guys. And that was the inspiration for the story.
All right. Well, let's hear a little snippet from it.
Absolutely. Claudia found her husband leaning over her pot of spaghetti, spoon in one hand, and a jar of cayenne in the other. "You know I can see you, right?" she said as she marched toward him. She took the jar and shouldered him away from the stove. "It just needs a little more heat," Rudy said, handing her the spoon. "I'll tell you what needs a little more heat," she said, eyeing her husband up and down. She threw out the enticement, but it landed like a plane on a 30-minute layover. No one was getting off. Rudy retreated to the breakfast table and pulled up the headlines on his laptop. "Your sauce would be amazing if you added a bit more kick. Do you see this guy? Some guy comes up with a new kind of granola and he's making millions. He's got a life-sized cutout displayed at the grocery store. I mean, everyone knows who he is. I also hear he and his wife are divorcing and fighting over his actual net worth," Claudia said. "There's always a price for fame." Rudy dismissed her with a wave. "Not us, babe. We jar that sauce, slap my handsome mug on the label, and we're laughing. That is, once you've added a few more Scovilles." Claudia covered the pot and dropped the spoon in the sink. She stepped toward her husband. Rudy reached out and encircled her waist without looking. His other hand scrolled through the news. She twisted her fingers through his curls. The touch of gray and a few extra pounds did nothing to quell her desire for him. Lately, however, Rudy seemed distracted. The only things that got him fired up were the hot peppers he ate morning, noon, and night. Claudia pressed herself against him, even to the point of thrusting her ample breast against his cheek. Rudy did not release his grip on her, but he did move his face slightly so that he could continue reading. Claudia sighed. Maybe she should be happy his midlife crisis hadn't gone the way of alcoholism or fast cars. "And why not my mug on the jar of spaghetti sauce?" Claudia asked. "Oh, babe, you wouldn't be able to handle the heat." Rudy slapped her on the ass before sliding his arm out to reach toward a bowl set out on the middle of the table. In it stood a collection of peppers, washed and dried. Rudy plucked one fat green jalapeno by its stem. He took a bite and chewed vigorously as he continued to read. "But I'm telling you, you've got to tweak that recipe." Claudia stepped away and untied the apron from around her neck. "Well, if you're so keen to give me advice, maybe you should come with me to the farmer's market." "But I'm reading." "All those reality stars and overnight successes will be waiting for you when you come back. Maybe you could spend some time with me." She put her hands on her hips when he didn't move. "You're the one nagging me about ingredients." Rudy rolled his eyes, but he did exit the webpage and close the lid on his laptop. Claudia held his hand, not minding in the least that she almost had to pull him across the parking lot. However, once they had walked through a garlanded bower, the provisional entrance to the market, Rudy picked up his pace. He headed to a large sign that displayed cartoon pigs happily marinating themselves and chickens gleefully roosting in roasting pans. The top of the sign was decorated with flying pies, and the caption read, "Soar to new heights. Enter the food fair competitions." "You see," Rudy said, "this is what I'm telling you." He grabbed a form from the doe-eyed young woman dressed in a straw hat, gingham, and short shorts. Everyone cheering as we accept the blue ribbon. Buyers clamoring to get our sauce on the shelves. Fame and fortune, baby. Fame and fortune. He held up the paper, practically pushing it into Claudia's chest. She took it and stuffed it into her purse, glancing around as Rudy's unbound enthusiasm drew eyes to him. "Well, that sauce of yours has got to stand out. You know how many people think they're the new ragu? The internet is littered with wannabes. We need an edge, an angle." You mean a gimmick? Can't it just be really good sauce? The kind you put over pasta? Are you nuts? It's got to be something people can't figure out, like a mystery ingredient, something impossible to copy. Why don't we say there's pixie dust in it? Would you get serious, please? It's bad enough that you don't take my suggestion to add some more chilies to the stuff we eat at home, but now we're talking business. We're talking about the public. You want something different, something amazing.
That is wonderful.
Thank you.
Love.
And it's so great seeing you reading it there with your kitchen in the background.
Yeah.
Claudia
Great reading.
I meant to do that. It's all set, you know.
It's not a real kitchen, just a fake kitchen.
Yeah, just fake. It's green screen.
And it's just so lovely hearing it in your voice too. It just brings so much life to the story.
Thanks very much.
And there is great foreshadowing in there at the very opening lines. It's just it's a really nicely crafted story. So
thank you very much.
Hey, everybody who hasn't read it yet, you're gonna have to find out why.
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun.
I love what you did with Ghost. I love it. I love the story and the levity and their relationship and the whole arc. And this, you know, this is one where definitely pick up an issue, folks, because it's lovely to see what happens.
Thank you. Yeah.
And it's a good culinary caution too.
Well, the research was really fun. So yeah, a lot of that. I knew an awful lot about peppers for a while.
Well, I can't chop peppers for dinner without thinking about you now. And I can't look at the hot sauce my kids sprinkle on their food without thinking, not too much.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm so glad that you guys, brought it to that you picked it up and that it's got a home. So I'm really pleased.
And so what are you working on now? Are you working on your novel or?
Yeah. Working on short stories, working on a novel. It's April is Poetry Month, right, with Writer's Digest. So I'm trying to write a poem a day. And it's also, I don't know how many people are doing NaNoWriMo, but it's Camp NaNoWriMo as well. So working on editing a children's novel.
Oh, cool.
Children's fantasy novel. So
well, Michelle, maybe you've heard we have a little poetry contest going for the next 5 days.
Yeah, I'll have to go through some of them and see if any of them are user friendly, public worthy.
That's a good point, Jen. Yes, we should be plugging. There's only 5 days left to enter the Magpie Award for Poetry, which is judged by the wonderful Renee Saragini-Saklikar, who you may have seen in previous launches and who was also in issue 28 along with Weiwei last fall. So thank you so much for that reading, Michelle. That was just wonderful. And I'm so glad that we were able to find a home for that story. And next up, I'm going to bring onto the screen PG Streeter. And PG Streeter is he's a writer who lives in Maryland, and he teaches high school English and philosophy. His previous publications include work in daily science fiction, Starship Sofa, and Electric Spec. And his story, The Earth Has Bubbles, just absolutely grabbed us from page one. It wasn't even a maybe. It was like, oh my goodness, this is, I'm a big Shakespeare fan, as many of us are in the writing world. But this one was absolutely wonderful. So PG, what made you want to write this story?
So a couple seeds of inspiration, I suppose. I wrote it when I was teaching Macbeth at the time, and so of course the text and the characters and the scenarios were all buzzing around in my head. And I love literary ghosts. So the Ghost of Banquo is one of my favorites. And for this one, a line that he speaks just couldn't get out of my head. And and at a certain point, before they approach the spot in sort of the woods where they meet the three weird sisters, Banquo says to Macbeth, "The earth has bubbles," and I started to think of reality as having a sort of membrane to it that could bubble up and spots of it could pop. So and I started to imagine, all the supernatural elements in the play as being places where that membrane is a little too thin, or it's the pores of it are opening up and we're kind of seeing between worlds. So I wanted to explore that. And I also wanted to give Banquo himself, even in ghost form, a little more interiority, because as I teach the play, he's kind of a foil to Macbeth himself, and he's kind of there so that we can have a moral character to stand in contrast to Macbeth, who ends up making these atrocious decisions. But I wanted him to have interiority and a bit of agency. And after the part that I'm going to end up reading, we see him as he haunts Macbeth, kind of poking and prodding at his mind and influencing his later decisions as sort of an active choice, which I thought would be a fun way to do it. So those are the thoughts that sort of came together for me for this one.
Well, that's cool because, for some reason I've always liked Banquo, even though he's, almost a non-character. He just shows up, drips blood on the floor and makes a point and goes. But for some reason I've always been attracted to that character. So I was really glad that you dug into him a little bit.
Great. Well, yeah, I'm thrilled that this one got picked up. And I'll be happy to read a short snippet from the beginning.
Absolutely.
When you're ready.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So these are the first couple pages of The Earth Has Bubbles. With him I marched across heath and moor as soil and blood caked our boots and swords. I marched with him through the rebels' ranks, and we waded through heaps of dead men, much as we'd trudged through marsh and bog, day upon day during that long march. We stood together and did bloody battle, and later they sang of us as twin cannons cracking. But that is just the way of songs. Really, there was little poetry in it. We earned every inch of our passage with swinging sword and ever-plodding foot, and men did not quail before us, but met us with the possessed strength that such occasions bring. The sounds of battle, of our swords rending flesh and bone, were not like thunder crash or cannonade. If you have not heard the sound of a blade running a man through, or of a spine being severed, or of a soldier's final gurgling death cry, I count you blessed. I will not ask you to hear such sounds today. I am a skilled horseman, of course, as is he, and as generals under Donchad's banner, we oft rode ahead on horse, our lord's light cavalry and heavy infantry filing behind us. The horses never lasted, though. All our company was on foot long before that final confrontation. How many of those miles did we tread upon our own worn leather boots? With him, I must have walked across all of Scotland. Son of Findlake, by our swelling feet, we were brothers. On my last day, after battle had ended and I believed for a moment that lie of peace, I rode, and my son rode at my side, but we dismounted and were treading lightly afoot when the cutthroats, hired men cloaked in hood and shadow, fell upon us. So it is on foot that I now continue to stride across this blasted land. My son does not walk with me, and this gives me courage. Either he fled and lives, or, dying, fled elsewhere. May he find himself in fields lit by the cool sun of early autumn. I can hope. But it shames me to admit that I did not look for my boy afterward. I simply stood up and looked down and saw myself heaped in a ditch, a trench riven among gray rock and gnarled root, and began to walk. While I lived, my last cries had been for my son, for his flight from that accursed spot, but in death, in stepping out of my flesh and into shadow, I cared only about him, not my boy, but the Red King. I will not say his name. I stepped out of flesh and walked as a shade upon the heath until Forrest emerged from fog and stood backlit by the setting sun. I saw it all as if through a veil, and none who passed me on the road perceived me. But the sisters are beings of that same shadow, and they now walked with me, although I could not see them. They whispered. And I'll stop right there.
Oh, thank you. That's just mesmerizing.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I love the cadence of that piece.
Yeah, and actually, so when Alan was speaking earlier about that sort of obsessive work over this of the sound of words, that's kind of my process as well. And I think I'm when it works out, I'm so glad that I pay attention to the sound of it, and I hope that becomes part of a signature style for me as my writing hopefully keeps going places. But I think it also is a funny thing, because sometimes it draws me so much into the sound of a particular passage that I end up writing pretty slowly. But that's okay. If we're not all Stephen Kings who can pop out multiple novels a year. So
no, and some of the best books are written really slowly. I mean, what did Susanna Clarke said? It took her 17 years or something to write Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And it shows, right? Like sometimes you have to take your time with things, but it's such a beautiful pacing you have in that story. It's just the right length. It's just, and the way the words just sort of roll, it feels like you're slogging through the mud, and you can feel the weariness and the pain, and that strange compulsion Banquo has to think about Macbeth and not about his son, and his this sort of misplaced loyalty that he has.
Right. Yeah, and that sense, and that's kind of, I had the idea kicking in my head, but in writing those opening few paragraphs, that is kind of what drew me into the prose of the piece itself, was feeling the cadence of the march, and that slow trudging movement on foot. And I'm really glad to hear that came through for those reading the piece as well.
Oh yeah, it worked. It absolutely worked. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And we've got some more contest winners to bring on to wrap up with today. So next we have on the winner of the Raven contest for last year, Nancy Ludmer. Now, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your last name correctly.
That was perfect, actually.
Okay, good. I'm so glad to hear that. So Nancy, she's had fiction in Kenyon Review, Carve, Electric Literature, Saturday Evening Post, Litro, and elsewhere. She's also won other contests, including Carve's Prose and Poetry Contest. And her flash fiction has been reprinted and translated into Spanish and read aloud on NPR radio. And her memoir, is it Critias Boy? Or
Critias Boy.
Critias Boy. Was named a notable essay in Best American Essays. So another author who writes in many genres and is, prolific and around. And she lives in New York City, where she practiced law for many years before turning to writing full time. So it seems to be a very popular second career for lawyers. I'm finding a lot of lawyers end up turning to fiction later in life. So welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And can you tell us a little bit about what inspired this?
There were really two story ideas that came together. And one was that I did hear about a couple, a relatively young couple, that had reached a rift in their relationship about where to live, city or country. Let me get in the center of the screen. I guess that's better. City or country. And this eventually ended up being resolved, but it was something that was distressing and really put a strain on their relationship. And the other was actually a story I heard from a neighbor, Penny Shear, during During our evenings sitting in our garden, we're really near the epicenter of COVID back in March and April. But our apartment building has a communal garden with benches that are separate enough from each other that I could sit there with my husband, she could sit there with her husband, and wearing our masks, we could still exchange stories. And she told me a story about the time that Christmas time she got her 2 little girls hamsters as a present. And so those 2 story germs began to sort of work their way in my brain and dreams, and I started thinking about it, and Good Intentions was the result.
All right. Well, let's hear a little bit of it.
I'm gonna read the opening, just a few sentences of the opening, and then I'll read an excerpt from the middle of the story. Good Intentions. When Drew announced our move and promised Hannah a dog, his intentions were good. He speculated that a 6-year-old would mourn the mid-year loss of her school and her friends as much as I mourned leaving my job and my friend, who really was just a friend, no matter what Drew suspected. But when Hannah crept downstairs to the chilly living room of our new home on Christmas morning, she found, instead of a puppy, 2 hamsters hard at work, noses to the wheel. Now I'll jump a page or so on to the middle of the story. The same way Drew craved a house in the country, Hannah craved a dog. But when it came to it, Drew decided puppies were natural-born homewreckers. Not that he loved hamsters. They're slightly disgusting, aren't they? He commented a few weeks after Christmas. One morning, the hamsters' cages had been moved to the basement. Out of sight, out of mind, Drew said cheerfully. Hannah adjusted. She compartmentalized her life in a way that seemed overly mature for a 6-year-old, and that reminded me of myself. When she came home from school, she'd visit the hamsters and talk baby talk to them. She organized their food. Eat your veggies, she commanded, and took them from their cages for stroking. Sometimes she listened to their hearts. Along with instructions for making the hamsters comfortable in their new home came a checklist of hamster ailments. We reviewed them together. Hannah checked each hamster's well-being regularly. Sneezing? No. Diarrhea? No. Pink eye? No. Aimless circling, which indicated an ear infection? No. Drew viewed Hannah's engagement with the hamsters as proof he'd made a good choice. She's learning things, he said, being responsible. Now my only worry is having to pay for veterinary school. What is it, 6 years? He was kidding, but not kidding. He couldn't help it, his mind always working like that, an endless stream of cost-benefit analysis. Same thing with my job, the job I had loved. The job I labored so hard to get, assistant DA, Kings County, AKA Brooklyn, New York. For Drew, the suspicions aroused by my closeness with my team leader, my hours cooped up with him, the investigations I had to keep secret, canceled out the benefits to me. Now I cleaned the hamsters' cages, which they kept remarkably tidy, except for the corner they used as a bathroom. I changed their bedding. I cleaned the rest of the house too, called contractors about updating the heating system, looked into a class at the local nursery for first-time gardeners. Drew's Christmas present to me was a fancy set of gardening tools, hand-forged in Holland. A spade, a weeder, a 3-tined cultivator for tilling, a narrow trowel for who knows what. I'd never gardened before or wanted to. Sometimes I stayed in the basement with the hamsters, secretly reading want ads on my laptop or in the local rag. Once I saw an opening for an assistant district attorney. In Hudson, a 45-minute drive. Then, like a mirage, it was gone. The application was 37 pages long. I filled it out anyway and signed up for email alerts about the next available position. I wondered what was happening elsewhere in real life. After more than an hour in the basement, I'd invariably get chilled and come upstairs. One of the best things about the hamsters was that they produced Hannah's first country friend, a classmate who'd received a hamster for Christmas too. Sometimes Emily came to our house for a play date. Occasionally, Hannah stayed overnight at Emily's. Because our house got so chilly at night, I was reluctant to invite Emily to stay with us until we renovated the heating system in April, which I explained to Emily's mom. One particularly frigid Saturday night when Hannah was at Emily's, Drew and I had what could only be called a romantic dinner. Butternut squash soup, whole artichokes with herb butter, snow pea pods, a chicken recipe that was actually called man-pleasing chicken. The first time I made it back in Brooklyn, the name was a joke. Now it seemed prophetic. We downed crystal glasses of Malbec. Delicious meal, Drew said. He reached across the table and gripped my hand. I'll do the dishes and then perhaps we can retire early. I knew he wanted me to meet his gaze. But at that moment, I realized I hadn't fed the hamsters all day. I'll be right back, I said. I went downstairs. The hamsters lay motionless in their cages.
And you're going to have to pick up the issue to find out what happened to those hamsters. Thanks so much, Nancy. So tell us, what are you working on these days?
Well, I have a couple of news stories that I've sent out. One rather long one that's set in 18th century Poland. And like many writers, I suspect even though I've sent them out, then I look at them now and then and think, oh, maybe I can fix this over here, or maybe the story is close to 8,000 words. So then I see that there's some kind of competition where it's a 7,500 word or a 7,000 word limit. So I'm still working on that. I have just started sending out a flash fiction. And I began, actually, you mentioned the lawyers going into fiction writing. I continued to write during the time I was a lawyer, but many of my stories were flash. And the reason was really because I was a single mom, I was working full time, and I could sort of hone and revise a flash fiction, and it was harder for me to do that with longer works. One of the great advantages now that I've stopped practicing law is being able to really turn to longer pieces.
Yeah, well, actually, that's true. And when I said, lawyers turn to fiction, we've actually found even more lawyers turning to poetry, which again, maybe that's because they have the time to work on a poem. Although I still maintain that poems are more hard work than anything. So now I'm going to bring another winner onto the screen. So Adrienne Gruber is the winner of the Surrey International Writers Conference. She was one of the honorable mentions this last year, I guess, was 2020 edition. And so we published the winners and the runners-up in the magazine. So we were actually really delighted to get her story, The Smell of Screaming. Adrienne's the author of 3 poetry books, Q&A, Buoyancy Control, and This is the Nightmare, and 5 chapbooks. Her chapbook, Mimic, was awarded the BP Nicol Award in 2012. And she lives in Vancouver with her partner and 3 daughters. And welcome, Adrienne.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I mean, I had a very visceral reaction to your story when I read it. It really hit home with me. But why don't you tell me a little bit about what inspired The Smell of Screaming?
Sure. Well, my maternal grandmother inspired this story. So she is obviously a real person, and so there's, I kind of weaved the story a little bit around the character of her. But she was a strong character in my family. She's no longer alive now, but she struggled with dementia later in her life. And so I became very interested in that. And I also became really interested in sort of how smell evokes memory, and especially familial memory and that kind of thing. And so I kind of wanted to experiment a little bit with those things. So.
Well, I would say it was a very successful piece. So let's hear a little bit about it, or I mean, a little bit of it.
So because the story is kind of divided and it's sectioned out and each section is sort of based loosely around a type of smell, I'm just going to read 3 sections, not completely in order. I'm going to read, I'm going to read section 3, 4, and 9, if you're following along. So 3, woody and resinous. After almost a decade of Granny living with my parents, she was moved into a care home, and my parents moved out to Vancouver to be close to my family. They brought my Granny's old antique furniture with them, the smell of those lost years of care imprinted on the vintage fabric and stained wood. I learned recently that the smell of freshly cut grass is actually the smell of a number of volatile organic compounds called green leaf volatiles that are released when the grass is damaged. Anything can cause widespread damage: insects, grazing animals, unintentional rough handling. Infections too, or mechanical forces like a lawnmower. That delightful smell of a freshly cut lawn is the grass trying to save itself from injury. It's a distress signal. Some of the compounds released stimulate the formation of new cells at the site of the wound, so it closes faster. Others act as antibiotics to prevent infection in the plant. The rush of chemicals emitted into the air, what we breathe in deeply and satisfyingly, the delicious green odor, creates healing possibilities. However, regardless of the preventative measures that are the result of these compounds, it's a cry for help, the result of fresh trauma. In other words, it is the smell of grass screaming in pain. I think we must smell the most alive in the most vibrant pain. It's when we're numbed or subdued or broken, but functional, that we stop leaving a scent trail. 4, chemical. Bodily scents are not taken into account in the 10 basic odors, bodies and their slow, stagnant decline. Granny used to refuse to allow caregivers to help her bathe, especially as her dementia worsened. My mom scheduled a healthcare worker to come and give her a bath twice a week, and Granny called the agency and canceled every booked appointment. At some point in Granny's early years of living with my parents, my mom discovered that Granny had been cleaning her vagina with hydrogen peroxide during the daily sponge baths she'd give herself at the bathroom sink. Whether it was compulsive hygiene or more of a purification ritual, the bleach began to eat away at the enamel over time. The slow corrosion resulted in my parents having to replace the sink before selling their house. 9, pungent. Decades before living with my parents and shortly after my granddad died of a heart attack in the bathtub, Granny moved in with her sister, my great Aunt Kay. After 2 years of Granny's demands and tantrums, Kay kicked her out and refused to have anything to do with her. Granny moved in with my Aunt Jackie and lived in the suite over the garage for the next decade. She smoked in the suite, and the smell reminded me of when I was a kid and would visit my grandparents' Victorian-looking apartment, where Granddad would sit in his underwear, smoking and reading the paper. I don't remember him interacting with me at all, but there are photos of me when I was about 6, with a bowl haircut and brown corduroy overalls, climbing all over him and laughing. He is smiling in the photos. I'm grateful for the documentation. Without it, the only thing I remember is the thick smell of smoke. At Granddad's funeral, Granny seemed petrified of her own grief. She instructed her daughters and grandchildren that we were under no circumstances allowed to cry at the service. I was 8. My mother and aunts told their mother that she was not allowed to dictate how they grieved for their father. It came out later that Granddad had numerous debts he'd kept from Granny. Devastated by the loss and overwhelmed by the financial burden she was left with, she tried to throw out or burn memories of him and their life together. She sold the family cottage at Sand Lake and instructed my mom and aunts to take boxes of photo albums to the dump. My mom promised they would, but she drove all but 2 of the boxes. Later, the 6 daughters divided up the memorabilia from the remaining 2 boxes, photos and letters from their parents' love story, making sure Granny never knew. I can smell those burning boxes in my sleep. I can smell my mom's tears. I can smell the musty interior of the Sand Lake cottage, the fresh, cold smell of the lake. Leeches sometimes attached to us when we swam, sucking down our warm, copper-smelling blood. Thank you.
Wow. That is so good. And there's so many good lines in that. That we smell the most when we're in pain and things like that. There's so much food for thought in that entire piece. And for those listening, that's only 3 of several sections in the story. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And in retrospect, it seems quite obvious that you are a poet, because it's almost like a prose poem.
Yeah, I think if I think of myself as a poet writing, it's a little easier for me because I'm just getting into other genres right now. It's been kind of a slow process. So yeah, poetry is definitely where I feel the most comfortable. But
yeah. And so what are you working on now?
I'm working on a book of essays that has a lot of sort of family stuff in it. A lot of stuff about motherhood. I have 3 daughters, so that sort of takes up a lot of my bandwidth. So a lot of stuff about motherhood. Some stuff about mental health. Yeah, so it's a work in progress right now. I'm not exactly sure where it's going to end up, but
well, I definitely look forward to reading it, because, like I said, a lot of it resonated with me, as I also have 3 daughters. And okay. I noticed you didn't choose to read aloud the waxing scene, but maybe not.
Yeah, I chose carefully. My oldest daughter, actually, I told her I was a little nervous about the reading, and she said, "Don't worry, Mom, just pretend everybody is a stuffy." That you're reading to a room full of stuffies. Okay. So you all kind of look like teddy bears.
That's great advice.
Yeah, I thought so.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I just want to remind everybody to head on over to the Discord channel. Even after this live cast, and we usually hang out there, and you can actually talk to the authors, casually in person, as much as you can online. And also, please do enter the door prize, because we still have 2 more prizes to give away. And I'm going to bring you all off screen now. And I'm going to read a little bit from my latest bit. This always feels really awkward to do when I'm hosting this. But so in this issue, there's another chapter of The Shepherdess. So for those of you who haven't been following along with Toinette, this is a This is a story of a shepherdess turned spy in 17th century France. She is in the employment of a woman she knows as Madame or the Countess. And her employer has just been poisoned. So why, I asked myself as I frantically rubbed Madame's wrist. Why would anybody poison the Countess if the poison was intended for her at all? And who? Claire? Her face was as grief-stricken as Mathilde's. And would she have the wherewithal to insert a poison needle into that withered orange, even if she wanted to? Michel de Foix? The pomander had come from him, but if he knew it was poisoned, why give it to a girl he'd just met? And why carry about the lethal object anyway? Henri returned with the surgeon, a slim man with a hooked nose and skin as dark as Henri's. He spoke with a strange, fluid accent. Allez, he said, shooing Mathilde away by flapping his hands. What has happened here? I straightened from my crouch. Poison, I said, and held Madame's limp palm for him to see. I think, I added modestly. He glanced at her hand and sniffed the air like a questing hound. He bent over, smelled her breath, if any of it there was, and tore at the neck of her chemise to expose her breastbone. He put an ear to her chest, then unfolded himself and looked me in the face. You are not wrong, I think. But what makes you say so? I picked up the pomander by its ribbon. He reached for it. Careful, I said, and held it out of reach till it stopped spinning. I pointed to the minuscule needle tip. Where there was one, there may be more. He took the ribbon from me with one hand and pulled an eyeglass out of his pocket with the other. Agreed. He brought his nose an inch from the pomander. The cloves and orange mask the scent entirely. It is a clever hiding place. He put the eyeglass away. Then he took a bowl of dusty dried rose petals from Madame's side table, emptied the contents onto the floor, and placed the pomander in the bowl. I will examine it later. For now, this patient clings to life, but with the faintest grip. Will you purge her? Asked Mathilde. That is what your Frankish doctors would do first, he said, which would be worse than useless, since the poison was not ingested. He rummaged in his bag. Phlebotomy would be their next recourse, perhaps more germane, since the poison is in the blood. Stop talking and just save her, cried Claire. Her face was streaming with panicked tears, guilt perhaps over having given the pomander, shock that it might have been her near death instead, along with the same fear that gripped we three women at the thought of losing our protectress. Her comment seemed to make him move even more languidly. He pulled from his bag a small glass vial of black liquid and a larger one of what looked like water. He poured a measure of the latter into an empty bottle and let a dozen drops of the black fluid fall into it. He corked the bottle, swirled it, and held the brown result to the light. His hand went into the bag again, and this time he retrieved a cloth bundle which he unrolled to reveal tiny knives, scissors, and other strange implements. He traced one of the large blue veins that crossed the Countess's bare chest and then pricked it with a scalpel. A bead of blood appeared and rolled toward the hollow between her breasts. He calmly pressed a small cloth onto it to stop the blood. Hold this, he commanded, and I replaced his fingers with mine. Next, he retrieved what looked like a tiny water skin and poured the pale brown mixture into it. He then inserted a long piece of tapered steel into the neck and wrapped the join with waxed thread. I could feel my heart pound through my fingers and into Madame's chest, as if it could beat for both of us. At last, he asked me to remove my hand. The blood welled up around the small wound, and he nodded at what must have been approval. He inserted the thin end of the tube into the wound and began gently squeezing. Much of the fluid trickled down her chest, mingled with blood, but I could see the blue vein turn white as the mixture fought its way in. At last he finished, quickly pressing the cloth into place. Hold, he commanded once more. He then took the phial of black liquid, pried open Madame's jaw, and let a few drops fall under her tongue. For good measure, he said. Now what? I asked. We wait.
I love that scene.
Thank
so
you.
much tension.
Thank you. Yeah, it was. It's a little pseudoscience in there mixed with 17th century medicine, and I haven't quite decided whether that piece is actually historical fiction or historical fantasy, but it's evolving as it goes.
a fabulous scene.
Um,
Love hearing it read out loud, Jen.
oh, thank you.
Terrific.
So our feature author, Robert Silverberg, couldn't be here today. He has an aversion to Zoom and things like Zoom. But I did. I spoke with Bob this morning by email, and he assured everybody that he is in excellent health and has received his vaccine and is enjoying a sunny California day. So Jen is just going to read a little bit from Chip Runner, which is a reprint of a 1980s story. And do you want to tell me a little bit more about it, Jen?
Sure, happy to. So it takes place in, I'm just jumping over here to the story, but I'm going to come back to you there. It takes place in a therapist's office to begin with, and a young boy has presented to the therapist, and they each have a very specific idea about what is going on with the boy. And as you both know, when we received this story, we were reading it with a present day mindset. And it was when we realized that it would be ideal to just publish it as a previously published piece, let it rest as a 1989 story, that it actually had the most power. So it's really interesting because so much has changed in the world of psychology and therapy, so much has changed in the world of technology. But as a piece, I think we all agreed that this story really did stand well as its own, as written. And actually, interestingly, I feel like it comments a lot on things going on today. That's my take on it.
It does, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's hear an excerpt.
Okay. So do cut me off. I've done a scan here to see. And if it goes over time, please just let me know. Chip Runner. He was 15 and looked about 90, and a frail 90 at that. I knew his mother and his father separately. They were Silicon Valley people, divorced, very important in their respective companies. And separately, they had asked me to try to work with him. His skin was blue-gray and tight, drawn cruelly close over the jutting bones of his face. His eyes were gray too, and huge, and they lay deep within their sockets. His arms were like sticks. His thin lips were set in an angry grimace. The chart before me on my desk told me that he was 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed 71 pounds. He was in his third year at one of the best private schools in the Palo Alto district. His IQ was 161. He crackled with intelligence and intensity. That was a novelty for me right at the outset. Most of my patients are depressed, withdrawn, uncertain of themselves, elusive, shy, virtual zombies. He wasn't anything like that. There would be other surprises ahead. So you're planning to go into the hardware end of the computer industry, your parents tell me, I began. The usual, let's build a relationship procedure. He blew it away instantly with a single sour glare. Is that your standard opening? Tell me about your favorite hobby, my boy. If you don't mind, I'd rather skip all the bullshit, doctor, and then we can both get out of here faster. You're supposed to ask me about my eating habits. It amazed me to see him trying to take control of the session this way within the first 30 seconds. I marveled at how different he was from most of the others, the poor, sad, wispy creatures who forced me to fish for every word. Actually, I do enjoy talking about the latest developments in the world of computers too, I said, still working hard at being genial. But my guess is you don't talk about them very often, or you wouldn't call it the hardware end or the computer industry. We don't use mundo phrases like those anymore. His voice sizzled with barely suppressed rage. Come on, doctor, let's get right down to it. You think I'm anorexic, don't you? Well, I know about anorexia. It's a mental disease of girls, a vanity thing. They starve themselves because they want to look beautiful, and they can't bring themselves to realize that they're not too fat. Vanity isn't the issue for me, and I'm not a girl doctor. Even you ought to be able to see that right away. Timothy, I want to let you know right out front that I don't have an eating disorder and I don't belong in a shrink's office. I know exactly what I'm doing all the time. The only reason I came today is to get my mother off my back because she's taken it into her head that I'm trying to starve myself to death. She said I had to come here and see you, so I'm here, all right? All right, I said, and stood up. I am a tall man, deep-chested, very broad through the shoulders. I can loom when necessary. A flicker of fear crossed Timothy's face, which was the effect I wanted to produce. When it's appropriate for the therapist to assert authority, simple-minded methods are often the most effective. Let's talk about eating, Timothy. What did you have for lunch today? He shrugged. A piece of bread, some lettuce. That's all? A glass of water. And for breakfast? I don't eat breakfast. But you'll have a substantial dinner, won't you? Maybe some fish, maybe not. I think food is pretty gross. I nodded. Could you operate your computer with the power turned off, Timothy? Isn't that a pretty condescending sort of question, Doctor? I suppose it is. Okay, I'll be more direct. Do you think you can run your body without giving it any fuel? My body runs just fine, he said, with a defiant edge. Does it? What sports do you play? Sports? It might have been a Martian word. You know, the normal weight for someone of your age and height ought to be, there's nothing normal about me, Doctor. Why should my weight be any more normal than the rest of me? It was until last year, apparently. Then you stopped eating. Your family is worried about you, you know. I'll be okay, he said sullenly. You want to stay healthy, don't you? He stared at me for a long, chilly moment. There was something close to hatred in his eyes, or so I imagined. What I want is to disappear, he said.
We will have to read the rest of the story to find out whether he does disappear or not.
That's a wonderful story.
It is a wonderful story.
Yeah.
And it does hold up well, you know, all these years later. And it's interesting to read as historical science fiction.
It is. It is.
Yeah. So we are almost at the end of time. It is time for our final prize draw. So I hope you've all put your names into the book launch, because this is your last chance. And we have, number 3, Alan. What has Alan won?
Well, if it's next on the list, I think it's the Elenia ebook bundle.
Okay. So we will send that bundle. That's my 2 books, Elenia's Song Overture and Elenia's Song Aria, by email. So Alan, just give your email address to Brooklyn or Melissa or somebody in the Discord chat. I mean, we have your email address anyway, but that will make sure that you get that bundle as soon as possible. And I just want to remind everybody too that, again, for today only, if you buy the print issue of the magazine, you will also get the ebook. Normally we sell them separately, but today for the launch, we are selling them as a bundle so that those of you who want the print but still want to read everything right away can get the ebook now. And you're actually getting a special sneak peek. So the final versions, the EPUB and the Mobi version, aren't up yet, but we have put up the print proof. So the print document as a PDF is there, which is, so you get to kind of get an early preview if you purchase that print issue today. And it is also on special. It's on special for $2 off. So good deal all around. All right, one last door prize. Oh, that one's already. Number 10. Who is number 10? Brenda. What does Brenda win?
A grab bag.
Okay. So, Brenda, you will get a mystery pulplet grab bag. I know you're a subscriber, so we have your address, but maybe just make sure that Brooklyn or Melissa has it as well, just so we get you on there. So I want to thank all our readers today. You were all amazing. Such good stories, such good readings. So nice to listen to the stories in your own words. Do stay around on the Discord channel. As soon as we shut this live stream off, we're going to go there and have a more informal chat. And you can pour yourself another glass of wine or whatever. And we hope to see you there. And again, the audience too, you're welcome into the Discord channel. You'll find the link in the launch event, and you should find it on the YouTube page. I'm not sure. I'll check on that. But thank you, everybody, from all of us.
One more thing before we go, Jen, could we just do one more shout out to all the poets out there for the closing days of our Magpie? We want to make the Pulp family bigger and bigger, so we want to invite all the poets to
get your poems in. You've got 5 days left. Our first judges are our editors, Daniel Cowper and Emily Osborne, and they are looking forward to reading all your poems. And then final day for entries is Thursday the 15th, and the winners will be announced a month from that and published in the fall issue. So yeah.
Thank you.
And for the short fiction writers, it's actually coming up pretty fast. May 1st, the Hummingbird Prize opens.
Yeah.
So if you don't do poetry, but you do flash, 1,000-word limit, and a $300 prize. So get those in. All right. Bye, everybody.
Right. Thanks so much.